This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Jansen. The show always live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on a YouTube channel. Now today, we look at the spate of police killings we've seen here in South Africa in the last week. And we ask you to answer the question, why are so many officers being murdered here in South Africa? That's the question of the day. At SABC Newsroom is where you interact with us. Also, we look at 220,000 COSATU workers' threat to strike in the Western Cape. Some learners in Mahikeng have not been at school now in 4 months. We also look at elephant poaching, women's rights in Africa, and we close with a focus on ukutwala, the practice of forced child marriage here in South Africa. But first, let's get the day's news from Anindo Mel.
Good morning, I'm Anindo Mel. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. The Public Protector is expected to address the media today to clarify what she calls distortions of her Nkandla report. The ANC has strongly attacked her report into what she says was 246 million rand spent on upgrades at President Jacob Zuma's private home. Madonsela found 17 months ago that the president had benefited unduly from the upgrades and that the president should pay back some of the money spent on non-security features. Meanwhile, the Public Protector will announce today when she will be releasing a report into the National Rail Agency, PRASA. Transport Minister Dipuo Peters has asked the Auditor General to probe alleged financial mismanagement at the agency. The request relates to the awarding of contracts and payments to service providers. EFF leader Julius Malema goes to court this morning on charges of fraud and corruption. The case relates to a 2009 52 million rand tender. The Limpopo Department of Roads and Transport awarded it to On Point Engineering, a company co-owned by Malema. He will appear alongside the company's 2 directors. Hundreds of economic freedom fighters held a vigil last night in support of their commander-in-chief.
To gather to say no to the victimization, to the persecution of our commander-in-chief.
Nigeria's army says it's rescued 178 people held by Boko Haram in the country's Borno state. It's believed that more than 100 of those freed were children and 67 of them women. And Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza has called for calm in that country. This after the assassination of his former intelligence chief in the capital, Bujumbura. It's been the most violent incident since Nkurunziza's controversial re-election for a 3rd term last month. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can also find us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anina. We asked you the question just now. Why are so many police officers being killed in the line and even off duty here in South Africa? There's our question of the day. That's where you can go and interact with us. We were going to deal with that interview up front. Vish Naidu, police spokesman, was going to join us in our Pretoria studios. He's running a little bit late. We'll try and get him on the show and talk about that a little bit later. Meanwhile, tweet us at SABC Newsroom. What do you think? Why are we seeing 3 more shot over the weekend? And, of course, this on top of the 5 that were killed in the line of duty last week. But let's move on. This month, 220,000 members of the Congress of South African Trade Unions will embark on a strike in the Western Cape if its application against Metro Rail is not dealt with urgently. COSATU says it's handed in its Section 77 application to NEDLAC. The application is against government, Metro Rail, PRASA, the City of Cape Town, the Western Cape Government, Cape Town Chamber of Business and Industry, and other businesses for the dismal state of the rail services in Cape Town. According to the union, business has been deducting wages from its members who've been arriving at work late due to delayed train services. Now, to talk to us about this problem, we are joined in our Sea Point studio in Cape Town by COSATU's Provincial Secretary, Mr. Tony Ehrenreich. Good morning to you, Mr. Ehrenreich. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
This is not a new problem. It's been something that the working classes in the Cape have been faced with for a long time. Just tell us exactly how it's playing out today in the communities.
Well, we have been in discussion with PRASA for a few years now, and 3 years ago they promised that the new trains would be on stream by now, and there was nothing we could do but wait for the new trains. We were prepared to, as part of the agreement we had with them, give them time to bring about the delivery in the hope that that would address the concerns that the commuters are experiencing on a daily basis. But what we found now is that the levels of unreliability, the late coming, the cancellation of trains, the cable theft and the resultant problems that led to a service that is hopefully inadequate and is leading to workers losing money now. On top of this hopeless circumstance, we've seen PRASA or Metro Rail increase the prices of tickets. Now they know that when the trains don't run, commuters have to leave the train system and go and take buses and taxis at an additional cost after they've already bought monthly or weekly train tickets. So this has become an intolerable situation, and that's why COSATU is threatening government with strike action to compel them to take urgent steps to fix the rail system so that it addresses the transport problem, but also fix the problem of the deductions by employers and threats of disciplinary action, as well as the rest of the transport system. We see transport and public transport preferencing the wealthy and old white areas in the city, and the rural areas or Cape Flats is largely neglected, and this is a shift in focus that we want, and the reason why we're considering protest action to impact on the political will of all levels of government to address the problem.
Just tell us how many people are affected daily, and also I'd like to get to know if you've had some reaction from especially the Cape Town Chamber of Business and maybe also the City of Cape Town.
There's a number of people affected by this. COSATU has probably about 120,000 people who work in the metropolitan area, so they're affected by the public transport system that unfolds here. But there are also a number of people who are not COSATU members who equally have this problem impact on their lives, and this is a concern and a measure that we're putting in place to improve their circumstances also. We have been in discussion with the City of Cape Town. We've taken the City of Cape Town to the Equality Court because we felt that they've rolled out services to the wealthy areas ahead of the poor areas on the Cape Flats. And poor people don't have private cars. They have no alternative for public transport. But the City of Cape Town clearly persists in Milnerton and Blouberg and the City Bowl areas, including Sea Point, and only rolls out a substandard service into Kailicha, Mitchell's Plain and the rest of the Cape Flats. So we're concerned about that and addressing that issues. And we want, when NEDLAC convenes the forum that brings all the parties together to try and find a solution, that all of the modes of transport be addressed. You would know that at the moment, in the Western Cape government between different rural towns, there's no public transport. There's no attempt by the Western Province government to do anything about this problem, and people in those areas are both prejudiced financially and in their social lives and the pursuit of public services like health and schooling and others. So we want an urgent response to these matters, and it's COSATU's intentions, as decided on by our Congress, that if this matter is not taken seriously, we will be going on strike with all 220,000 of our members in the Western Cape at the end of August, because we've got to pressure government to change their attitude in responding to the needs of public transport for working people. We spend billions on new airplanes every few years, but the train service is in a horrendous state, and they probably transport a much wider section of our society than the few wealthy people who jump on planes every day.
Now, the Section 77 application to NEDLAC, you've handed that one in. Just tell us what have you put in, all of the heads of argument, and then also the response.
Well, Section 77 essentially deals with the Labour Relations Act and says that COSATU, once it files an application, NEDLAC must convene a meeting. There's got to be a consideration of the issues that are of concern and that have a socio-economic impact on the communities affected, and that discussions must include all of the role players. So NEDLAC will convene that meetings. We'll have that discussions. We'll try and find solutions. We certainly think they are short-term measures. We think that the PRASA must retract the demand for increased rates. They have a contractual obligation to provide the services to people once people buy the tickets, and so they must meet that contractual obligation. If they can't, they must compensate people. We want employers to stop disciplining and deducting wages from workers. And then we want the City of Cape Town to focus on rolling out the BRT system into the Cape Flats areas that have the greatest need, certainly a much greater need than the old white areas in Milnerton and Blouberg. And finally, we want a bus service between the rural towns so that people are able to move between these areas. But safety and security has also become a pressing issue over the last few weeks. We've just read in the papers that 2 carriages filled with people were robbed, all of them by about 8 thugs at a time getting into the system. This, through the Van Minnen case, is an obligation that PRASA and government has through the South African Railway Police to provide those security services. They're not putting those services in place, and people are not only robbed of their monies, but they also have their lives threatened, and many people have been injured and killed. That must be addressed as a matter of urgency, because we can't have, on top of the huge burdens, this problem of safety and security also.
Mr. Tony Aronaga, thank you for joining us. That's COSATU's Provincial Secretary down in the Western Cape, talking not just about the issues around the transport problems, but also security, people being robbed, even thrown off trains in the Western Cape at times. They say all 220,000 members of COSATU there will go on strike by the end of the month. He just said by the end of August if these problems are not addressed. Let's take a quick look at our picture of the day. It comes from Vanderpump Support. It says, so here's another one who loves to kill majestic animals. Sabrina Corgatelli, I think. Corgatelli, is it? Yes. I read this thing. I think it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. She talks about, I've never had a giraffe. I've never had a giraffe. Now I have one. I mean, really? Seriously? Now you have a giraffe, my dear. Anyhow, let's take a look at the front pages from around the globe. We start in the United States. The USA Today reports that wildlife along northern California's inland coastal range has now burned nearly 46,000 acres and forced the closure of 2 highways. Then in New York, on the other side of the country there, the International New York Times says the strongest action ever taken in the U.S. to combat climate change. President Barack Obama has unveiled a set of environmental regulations devised to sharply cut planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions from the nation's power plants and ultimately transform America's electricity industry. Finally, newspapers across Europe are leading with Cilla Black, the blind date presenter whose show business career spanned more than half a century. Well, she's passed away at the age of 72 at her home in Estepona on the Costa del Sol. Now, of course, EFF leader Julius Malema and his co-accused Lesiba Gwangwa and Kagiso Dichaba are appearing before the High Court in Polokwane shortly this morning on corruption, fraud, money laundering and racketeering charges. These are some of the comments that you've been putting forward on social media with regards to this. It says here from Mandy Wiener, mind you, we all know Mandy Wiener. Julius Malema due to go on trial for fraud in Polokwane today. It will be interesting to see if it actually runs, and if so, for how long. Mpati Mota says, we have to be honest, there is no way the verdict of the Malema trial is going to come out not guilty. Well, the courts are independent. Mduduzi Mzaniwa says, and now Floyd blames people for his friend's case. Amen. Hashtag Malema says. Then we have Shiam Tela. He says, Julius Malema will appear to court today. Tsunami disaster. Every member of EFF in Polokwane will be out to support their leader. I think, yeah, there was a night vigil that was supported by a few hundred EFF supporters in Polokwane last night. Now let's have a quick look at what's happening around the country today. Of course, Polokwane, where do you have it? Yeah, there we have it. Yes, the trial of fraud trial of Economic Freedom Fighters leader Julius Malema and his co-accused was expected to start in the High Court. Malema and co-accused On-Point Engineering directors Lesiba Gwangwa and Kagiso Dichaba face charges of racketeering, fraud, corruption and money laundering, as I said a little bit earlier. Then in the capital, the trial of 9 former Davidson policemen accused of killing Mozambican minibus taxi driver Mido Masia is expected to continue in the High Court there as well. Now, we're waiting for the police spokesperson to join us in the capital. Hopefully after the break he'll be with us. See you then.
Welcome to AM News here on SABC News Channel 404.
So the people who also should be concerned are the people who voted for people of that ilk.
South Africa is indeed a unique country, and South Africa has a democracy that is very exceptional.
If people want to change the rules, do it properly, do it within the context of the Rules Committee within Parliament, and when you shout, it doesn't mean people are listening to you.
But there is a point of authority that must always prevail.
The ANC is very determined. We will not allow South Africa's Parliament to be dragged down into the mud, and we will defend the Constitution and Parliament.
I think our country is really being torn to pieces. And I think that the struggle for liberation didn't take place for people to play the fool like this in our country.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. Don't forget, our question today to you at home is, why are so many police being killed in South Africa? We run that question right on there. Why are so many police officers being killed in South Africa? We'd love to hear your views. We'll put it up a little bit later in the show. We'll put it up even tomorrow. It's concerning 3 more shot over the weekend after 5 killed last week. Now, the police are on their way to our studio in Pretoria. The spokesperson is about, I was told, a kilometre away from our studio, so hopefully shortly. But we'll move on with our lineup as time waits for nobody. More than 1,000 learners in the Matloding village outside Mahikeng in the northwest have not been to school for almost 4 months now, and the matter is far from being resolved. Disgruntled learners and their parents are up in arms against Northwest's education department and have accused the education authorities of imposing its rationalisation policy on them. The department wants schools with a few number of learners to be closed and merged with other schools in the neighbourhoods. Parents have, however, allowed primary school learners to return to their classes as the rationalisation policy does not affect them. A similar situation happened last year in the John Daulo Gatsewe district municipality when the protesting community barred 16,000 learners from going to school there. The Department of Basic Education was forced to take drastic action that affected the future of so many learners. The MEC for Education and Sport Development in the Northwest, Mapefo Matsemela, joins us in our Mahikeng studio to talk about the situation in Matloding. Very good morning to you, ma'am. I thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers too.
Are we likely to see this situation continue now, madam, and become like the one we've seen in the Northern Cape, where grade 12 learners missed the end-of-year examinations, and even the children in lower grades had to repeat their grades this year?
I think certain things need to be confirmed from the start, because some may be opinions, some may be facts. A fact here is that the learners in these areas which have been affected, particularly Matloding and the neighboring villages and also the neighboring schools, says only 35 days, not 4 months. It means learners have never been to school for only 35 days. But it is a lot to the system as a whole, because there is such a great loss to the grade 1s, grade Rs, 2, 3, etc., and etc. And since this incident have started, we have been trying to negotiate thoroughly and with confidence with the people of Matloding. For the last time I was there, it was on the 28th of July, means last week. And we have agreed with the people of Matloding because Khosi has been involved, the local headsmen have been involved, all other people who are actually involved in this whole thing at large. They were in a meeting, and we have agreed that learners must go back to school, And right now, primary learners are back to their school because there were two options that the community were suggesting, that they don't want to see their children at another village. They wanted their children to go to Lohagem village. And we had a settlement. We have actually agreed. And I believe that all the departmental officials have been working around the clock that buses, transport must be actually prepared so that learners must be taken to Lohagem village. The only problem right now is a village called Matateng, whereby we are having only 35 learners. And parents at that particular stage didn't show that they want their children to go to Lohagem also. But what we have picked after the meeting is that parents also want their children to go to Lohagem. But also parents need to know the facts around here. We can take everybody to Lohagem according to your wish, to their wish. But at Lohagem, again, we speak of teachers, because teachers who are there right now are teachers who are supposed to be there in line with the PPM. Now, once we overcrowd this school at Lohagem, it means we are going to have a challenge as the Department of Education. And secondly, we are going to overcrowd the classes at Lohagem. It is going to be very difficult for teachers, honestly, to teach huge numbers of learners. Lastly, on this matter, the grade 12s have since been to their classes because we had to run to the grade 12s first, necessarily not saying we didn't care about other classes, but we had to run to the grade 12s and see to it that we arrange something which is quite conducive for the grade 12s. We have talked with Khosi, we have talked with the parents that at least they let us continue with the grade 12s. They must go to school. They've written their mid-year examinations, and they've been at school, the grade 12s. And I should think when you compare us with what has happened in the Northern Cape last year, there will be a vast differences.
You've lost a lot of time, whether it's 35 days or 4 months. It's not important that. What is important is how are you going to recover the lost time? Do you have plans in place?
Yes, we are always like that in the Northwest province, that whenever we lose 1 day, whenever we lose 2 days, at least we must have a recovery plan. Before we close schools in June, we have agreed through the departmental officials, because I wasn't in a good condition health-wise. I got an accident before that, so the whole of June I was not at work. So I've sent the HOD and a team of other officials. They met with Khosi, they met with the villagers, and we have agreed that this is our recovery plan. All of us, we were hoping that when we reopen in July, our learners will be at school. We will be implementing the recovery plan. And what we were actually surprised at the end of the day that during the reopening, the communities were saying their learners are not going to school. Hence, I was supposed to go there. And you are right, indeed, to say 1 day or 2 days. As much as I was saying to the communities, what you need to do for your children, it doesn't matter at what school. What is important is for your children, is for these young people to go to school and receive the quality of education that we are talking of in the country.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. Education is the only tool to freedom that our children has. Very important. That is the MEC for Education in the Northwest Province. Mapepo Matsemela. She joined us live talking about children being out of school. Some say for 4 months. She says for 35 days. 1 day is too many. It's difficult for children to catch up with the amounts of work that they have to go through in schools now. Of course, don't forget our question of the day. We're still waiting for the police spokesperson to join us in Pretoria. As soon as he gets in, we'll put him on the show, because this is the burning issue. Why are so many police officers being killed here in South Africa? why are police at risk? In the latest incident, a pedestrian walked up to two JMPD officers and shot them while they were busy directing traffic. Really? That's a little bit much. So we're waiting for the police to come. Police spokesman Vish Naidu is on his way. He says he's a kilometre away. It looks like it's quite a long kilometre. Anyhow, we move on. Women in Africa are still facing a number of human rights violations as well as gender equality issues. Reports show the brutal treatment of women and girls by militant groups such as Boko Haram. We see mass kidnappings, rape, sexual slavery, forced marriages and discrimination towards those who are HIV positive or even infertile. These are some of the main issues affecting women across the continent. Last month, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women examined women's rights in a number of countries, with the Gambia and Namibia being highlighted on the African continent. These countries are but a few of 189 state parties aligned with CEDAW and therefore are required to submit regular reports to this committee. Now, joining us via Skype from Mauritius this morning is United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women panel member at the convention, Pramila Patton. A very good morning to you, Ms. Patton. Now, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Taking a look at the key findings of your report, can you just give us an insight, please?
We examined the report of Namibia last week, and we have noted progress in many areas, as well as efforts undertaken by the government to comply with its obligations under the CEDAW Convention. And some of those positive aspects noted relate to the representation of women in public and political life, with 47% of women in parliament since the last elections in 2014. A woman prime minister, as well as a woman deputy prime minister. We have noted some improvement in the legislative framework, as well as progress in the field of education in terms of literacy rate, enrollment rate of girls in primary, secondary, and tertiary. But our main concerns relate to the persistence of harmful practices, discriminatory stereotypes, deep-rooted patriarchal attitudes, violence against women. For example, the high prevalence of violence against women and girls, such as rape and murder, often committed by intimate partners, and the low rate of prosecution of those perpetrators of violence against women, but also the frequent withdrawal of cases by women victims of violence. Other issues of concern expressed by the committee relate to trafficking in women and girls and the lack of a comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation in the areas of employment, high rates of unemployment among women, continued occupational segregation in the field of health, for example, the prevalence of HIV/AIDS and unsafe abortions. Rural women's limited access to land grabbing, limited access to microfinance and microcredit schemes are some of the key findings of our committee.
Right now on the African continent, we see the rise of militant organizations that kidnap especially women and children, that they really target women and children. What can governments and aid organizations do to assist women who are facing these kinds of perils and threats?
In fact, the convention itself, the CEDAW Convention itself, requires government to regulate non-state actors as well, state but also non-state actors, under their duty to protect women and girls. And they must exercise due diligence to prevent, to investigate, punish, and ensure redress for the acts of such groups like Boko Haram and ISIS that impair the rights of women. So for us, government must reject all forms of rollbacks in women's rights protection in order to appease non-state actors, such as terrorist groups, armed groups. It is important for government to engage with those non-state actors to prevent human rights abuses related to their activities in conflict-affected areas, in particular sexual and gender-based violence. It is important for government to establish effective accountability mechanisms or to use gender-sensitive practices, example, the use of female police officers in the investigation of violations during and after conflict, to ensure that violations by non-state actors are identified and addressed.
What about education? We know it needs to be addressed across the continent. It's also in line with the UN's Millennium Goals, development goals, that is. What progress are we making in increasing the levels of education amongst young women on the continent?
Well, progress varies from country to country. While indeed much progress has been made over the past 10 years in rectifying gender imbalances in education, there are socio-cultural, economic and political challenges which still constitute barriers to girls' education. On the one hand, we note some improvement in enrollment rate, in literacy rate. At the same time, we note dropout rates among girls as a major challenge. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it is reported that some 16 million girls are not in school. Only 1 in 4 poor African girls attend school. I mean, we are scrutinizing government's budget allocation for education, urging them to create conditions for the elimination of gender disparities, the need to promote girls' education and development, to provide scholarships for girls at all levels. But we are particularly concerned about the extent to which education of girls is severely compromised in situations of armed conflict and insecurity, which plague our continent. How girls' enrollment often drops in times of war, how schools are closed owing to insecurity, occupied by state and non-state armed groups or destroyed.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I thank you for joining us today. That is Pramila Patton. She's a member of the UN's Committee on the Elimination and of Discrimination Against Women. She came to us live from Mauritius this morning, giving us the latest work that the committee's been doing on dealing with the problem of discrimination against women here on the African continent. Time for us to take a look at what's on our Facebook page here at Newsroom. Doctors treating Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu say they are satisfied now with his progress. He underwent minor surgery and will remain in a Cape Town hospital for another few days. So Tutu was hospitalized for the second time in a week after complaining of discomfort. Of course, he had a viral infection, they said. Also, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said yesterday he would seek greater backing for a UN peace plan for Libya, which has been spurned by some key players in the country where 2 rival governments are vying for power. Then finally, Israel's Security Cabinet approved yesterday the detention of citizens suspected of waging violence against Palestinians without trial in a crackdown aimed at capturing the perpetrators of a lethal West Bank arson attack blamed on Jewish militants. Of course, for more, you can go to Facebook, put in SABC Newsroom in a search bar. We'll pop up, like our page, and we'll give you updates on your device all the time. Time to take another break. Hopefully when we come back, Vish Naidu of the police will join us so we can talk about our question of the day, which is, why are so many police officers being killed in South Africa? What is the underlying problems? What is going on? Hopefully the police will join us. Time for a break.
Interjections about the deployment of soldiers in townships provoked a war of words between Diane Kolebana of the DA and the Minister of Defense, Mosivuyo Mapisa-Nqakula.
I have been accused by the Minister of slaughtering people.
Honorable Kola.
May I assist the Minister, sir? I'm Honorable Kola Bana.
Thank you very much. We actually ran a campaign in the 80s that actually threw you out of the townships because you were actually maiming our people.
So I would ask that I have an apology and a withdrawal.
I'm not going to withdraw.
No.
A View from the House, weekdays, 2:30 p.m. CAT on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the story making headlines today. The public protector is expected to address the media today to clarify what she calls distortions of her Nkandla report. The ANC has strongly attacked her report into what she says was 246 million rand spent on upgrades at President Jacob Zuma's private home. Meanwhile, the public protector will announce today when she will be releasing a report into the National Rail Agency, PRASA. Transport Minister Dipuo Peters has asked the Auditor General to probe alleged financial mismanagement at the agency. And EFF leader Julius Malema goes to court this morning on charges of fraud and corruption. The case relates to a 2009 52 million rand tender. The Limpopo Department of Roads and Transport awarded it to On Point Engineering, a company co-owned by Malema. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Given, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. We've had our focus on women's rights in Africa shortly. Now we take a little bit further. Childhood memories are usually filled with innocence and laughter, but that's not entirely the case for thousands of girls here in South Africa, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. According to the UN, 14.2 million girls in developing countries around the world are married off every year before their 18th birthday. In South Africa, child marriage often takes place in the form of ukutwala, practice of abducting young girls and forcing them into marriage, often with the consent of their parents. Now, since 2009, more than 30 underage girls have been rescued from forced marriages in the Eastern Cape, with a number of cases going unreported. Joining us from our studios in Durban this morning is Sizane Ngubane. She's the director of the Rural Women's Movement. A very good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning to you, and thanks for having me.
Let's talk specifically about ukutwala. The practice is a traditional practice. It's been around for centuries. Is there still a place in your world for this kind of practice today?
Not at all. To me, it looks like another form of sexual slave.
Sexual slavery. How do we deal with sexual slavery in the 21st century? And what would you like to see happen here in South Africa with regards to ukutwala?
As the country, our government adopted the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1995? I can't remember. What I would like to see is that an international treaty being translated into action, like being implemented on the ground.
Tell us about the experience, ma'am, that you've made, how many cases you've dealt with, and what are some of the heart-wrenching stories that you can maybe share with us?
I would share the story of a young girl who was 14 years old when she was adopted. I'm not going to mention her name. She lost her mother when she was 4 years old, and was raised by a grandmother, and the grandmother was staying with his son, her uncle. When she was 14 years old, she had a vision about what she was going to do with her life. She wanted to become a pilot. And when we ask why a pilot of all the careers in the world, she says when she was still young, she was watching TV, and on the TV they showed the inside of an aircraft, and she just thought, this is where I want to be. But one day when she was come back from school, her uncle was sitting in a car with two strangers, and he asked her to jump into the car, pretending like he was sending her somewhere. She joined the uncle and two other men in the car, and the car drove straight into a deep forest. And in a deep forest, the driver stopped the car, and the two men who were sitting with her at the back seat grabbed her and dragged her out of the car. And the driver and the uncle drove away. And when she looked in the bushes, she saw a man who was like 15 years older than her, who has always been chasing after her and saying he wants to marry her. And then she thought, oops, it means that Ugutwala is going to happen.
That's certainly.
And then when this guy came, his two friends started beating her up, forcing her to say she's in love with this guy. And she is saying, while they were beating me up with chambokes, I was saying in my mind, it doesn't matter how painful it is. I am not going to say I am in love with this man.
Ma'am, why in today's world do you think a lot of these cases still go unreported?
Oh, from our experience, when we started working on this issue at Utugela district, we started working with 80 women and 2 men who were doing home-based caregiving in the area. We worked with them for a month, and none of them knew anyone who has been adopted and forced into a marriage. Why were they not saying it's a practice which has been normalized in their community? It's because Ugutwala has been distorted. It is now associated with rape, and women do not want to speak about it because once you start speaking about having been raped, there is a stigma around Ugutwala because of the rape that is associated with it.
Thank you for joining us, ma'am. We've run out of time for this interview. We are talking about Ugutwala, forced marriage here in South Africa. 14.2 million girls around the world every year are forced into marriage before their 18th birthday. That certainly is a very concerning fact and a very big number. Now, 3 more police officers were shot over the weekend. 2 of them members of the JMPD, that's the Johannesburg Metro Police. They were shot by a pedestrian in Midrand last night and are in serious condition in hospital. A 37-year-old officer was wounded in the leg in Delft on the Cape Flats in the early hours of yesterday. All of this after President Jacob Zuma condemned the killing of 5 police officers last week. The president called on law enforcement officials to defend themselves against criminals. This year alone, nearly 30 off-duty officers and more than 20 on-duty officers have now been murdered. Now, to talk to us about this alarming figure, we are joined from our Pretoria studios by the police spokesperson. He's finally made it, Brigadier Vishnu Naidu. Brigadier, thank you very much for joining us today.
Very good morning, and thanks for having me this morning.
Brigadier, we ask our viewers a question here. Why do they think are so many police officers being shot and targeted in South Africa? Why do you think?
Well, firstly, I want to say we can primarily attribute this to our unrelenting attitude towards crime and criminality in this country. You would notice in the past weeks we have intensified our operations against various forms of criminality in the country. Particularly under the banner of Operation Fiela. On Thursday and Friday, we had non-stop operations throughout the country, which saw the arrest of thousands of suspects. And I think it's because of this attitude towards crime and criminality in the country that we see our police officers coming under fire by ruthless criminals. There are also other reasons why we believe that our police officers are being attacked. One of them is to rob our police officers of their firearms, and the other is just basically criminals are trying to evade arrest. But we put it down to primarily our unrelenting attitude towards crime and criminality in this country, that our police officers are coming under attack by these criminals.
Brigadier, how does our statistics with regards to police killings and police attacks compare to the rest of the world?
Well, of course, I cannot say compared to the rest of the world exactly what it's like, but there are far too many police officers that are being killed in our country. In fact, for this year alone, as you rightfully put it, almost 30 police officers were killed off duty, 29 of them to be exact, and 25 were killed on duty. That's 54 police officers killed compared to 47 for the same period last year. 27 of them were killed off duty last year and 20 on duty. And of course, it's because of us intensifying our approach towards crime and criminality in the country that this is actually happening. And we as management have put in various measures in place to assist police officers to prevent them from falling victims to these kind of attacks. And some of them being intensifying our tactical approach when approaching criminals, when doing house penetration, approaching suspicious vehicles, and so forth. And also we have a once-a-year a shoot that is compulsory for our members to go on to help them hone in on their skills to in all the firearms that they use during the normal course of duty. And then we also intensifying and sending out communication on a regular basis on do's and don'ts, on how they should approach different situations. Because remember, every time a police officer is killed, it's communicated throughout the country. It has its advantages and disadvantages to communicate that. And one of the things that we want our police officers to see is the circumstances under which our police officers are coming under attack, and to prevent themselves from being attacked in a similar fashion as well.
Now, Brigadier, I heard you on radio last week when you spoke about this. I heard you say when we lose our police officers, it sends a wave of depression through the corridors of police stations across the country. How does it affect the force in general? And then how do you encourage other police officers to stay positive during these difficult times?
Remember, we've always said that being a policeman or woman is not a job, it's a vocation. Police officers have taken the responsibility to create a climate in this country where we can make people feel safe, and we make sure that people are safe. And we have committed, we have pledged this pledge to make sure that people are and feel safe in the country. And this is what's driving our police officers every day. Of course, we don't want to hear about our police officers being shot and wounded, our police officers being shot and killed. But of course, we have a duty and an obligation to make sure that the people of South Africa are and feel safe. We know that we are dealing with a very violent society, and we have to confront this at some stage of our policing career. But as you rightfully put it, I did say that there's advantages and disadvantages, sending out the communications of our police officers being shot and killed. And the disadvantage is that it sends out this wave of depression amongst police officers, because none of us want to hear of our colleagues being shot and killed, because we are not just colleagues, we are family. We don't want to hear, because when this happens, the next question is which police officer is next? And one of the things that we're driving towards now is to get community involvement. We're engaging communities at a large scale through our community policing forums, through MBZOs and so forth, to stand against this attacks on police officers. You would have noticed this weekend the presidency has issued a statement as well, calling on society to stand with the police, calling on the security forces to continue in joint operations to rid this attacks on police officers. It's not only South African police service members that are being attacked. You also would have found this weekend that 2 Metro police officers were shot and wounded as well. So there is this onslaught by criminals to attack law enforcement officers in uniform that are trying to make this country a safer place for all.
Brigadier, I thank you for joining us today. Eventually, I have to add, but thank you for coming through for us, because it's a problem that we all in South Africa face with you as the police. The shooting, the killing. This weekend, 3 more police officers, 1 police officer, 2 JMPD members were shot while doing their duty. What do you think? The question that we ask is why so many police officers are being shot in South Africa. Brigadier Vesh Naidu says he thinks it's because the police are doing their job, because of things like Operation Fiela, because they're so vigilant in targeting criminals and criminality. What are your views? At SABC Newsroom, that's where we want you to answer that question. We've run out of time. It's shortly before 10 o'clock now. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show, of course, available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.